We all know that one person, whether it be school, work, or football, that just thinks very highly of themselves. Usually it's been a while ago since they achieved some success, but they decided to never really improve and coast off their old reputation. Typically we find this person kind of annoying, you know? Well, in the footballing world, this just so happens to be Jadon Malik Sancho. And you know what? Maybe I'm being a little bit harsh, but Sancho so far in his career has left a lot to be desired. We have to remember that at one point in time, Sancho was realistically considered one of the hottest commodities in world football. Of course, it's understood he's never been at the levels of, let's say, Mbappe or Vini Jr, but Sancho in his career has been able to stand out amongst his peers due to his great technical ability. Yet as time goes on, we currently find ourselves in a position where Sancho's stock at just the age of 24 is rapidly declining. Personally, I don't hold anything against Sancho individually. I'm sure he's a fine person. Truth is, the public opinion on Sancho's beginning to reach a point where you have to question what is even going to be his next move. But the thing is, it doesn't feel like Sancho's very self-aware of this. For some reason, it feels like every week he still sees himself as that younger guy who had the world at his fingertips. And you expect footballers to have this type of confidence because heck, that's what got them there in the first place. But with Sancho, it ends up feeling a little bit more like he's in denial. But kind of like I alluded to, it wasn't always the case like this with Sancho. When he was first coming up through the ranks of world football, I felt like we were witnessing a new star that was bound for glory. So what the heck happened with Sancho's career? And real quick boys, if you're new to the channel, enjoying the content, enjoying the video, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. We're dropping weekly football videos, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss an upload. And if you're not new to the channel boys, welcome back. Glad to have you around for another video, of course. With that being said boys, let's get into the tumultuous career of Jadon Sancho so far. So when it comes to how Sancho got started in his career, it's actually somewhat of an interesting story. He initially started off at Manchester City's academy, where he would accelerate his development and quickly become a top prospect. Playing alongside other talented youngsters like Phil Foden and Reiss Nelson, Sancho was given the proper tools to adapt to higher levels of football. However, as he got better individually, he did expect and was promised more opportunities to come his way when it came to being a part of the main team. But this is where he would reach an impasse with City. After failing to reach any notable agreements regarding game time with the main team for the 17-18 season, Sancho really just didn't want to be at the club anymore. And pair this with disciplinary issues that he was having behind the scenes, which was some major foreshadowing, and it reached a point where both parties agreed a move would be best for everyone. So on August 31st, 2017, Sancho signed to the reliable youth talent factory that is Borussia Dortmund for 8 million euros. For Dortmund, they had just acquired a very bright young talent that would help them tremendously in the league and that they could potentially sell to Bayern Munich in a couple of years for tons of cash. For Sancho, he was joining a side that had been able to foster so many young talents while remaining somewhat competitive in the league. Pair that with the fact that he was signed by Dortmund to be part of the main team, so he would be sharing the pitch with players like Aubameyang, Pulisic, Andre Schürrle, Mario Götze, and Marco Reus, who would all greatly work off one another and aid Sancho's development a ton. So at just the age of 17, this was a year full of accomplishments for Sancho. He would become the first Englishman to ever feature for Dortmund in the Bundesliga, and he would also be the youngest player to feature in the Bundesliga this year. Outside of Dortmund, Sancho would also be key in England's under-17 World Cup win, as he would have some vital performances in the group stage. And this wouldn't be the only youth football that Sancho played at this point in his career. He was still playing a couple of games for Dortmund's youth side at this point in time as well. And because of this, Sancho wouldn't really start games for Dortmund until January of 2018, but when he would come on as a substitute before that, he would impress with the time that he was given. And because Bundesliga backlines really give attackers so much space, Sancho had all the freedom in the world to take on his man and showcase that phenomenal dribbling ability that he possessed. He would also face some time out due to an injury this season, but as a whole, he would put up some very standard numbers for his first season. But from here, a rocket was strapped to the back of Sancho and there was no looking back. The following 18-19 season, Sancho took the opportunity to become a main part of the squad, playing primarily off the right. This season, at just the age of 18, Sancho would prove to be a very dominant force in the Bundesliga. Despite coming on as a substitute to begin the season, it would be his 2 assists off the bench against Leverkusen that convinced his manager to give him the starting role. From here, Sancho would go on to finish the campaign with 13 goals and 20 assists in 43 games of football. If you need an assist with anything, Sancho was going to be there to help you out. He had really reached a new level this season and he just became an attacking monster. It felt like every week he was embarrassing any defender that was up against him, and it was proved by the fact that Sancho was pretty much the best dribbler in the league that year. This season would also come with more milestones for the young Englishman, as he would break Podolski's record for the youngest player to reach 9 goals in the Bundesliga, would get his first Champions League goal in a big win over Atletico Madrid, and would also manage 2 braces in the Bundesliga against Mainz and Hertha Berlin. Having been named in the Bundesliga team of the season, it was at this point where English clubs began to garner interest in Sancho and they wanted to bring him back to the homeland. Most notably, this is where the transfer saga with United began, and it would be one of the most annoying and dragged out sagas of recent years. And despite the concrete interest, United accepted that they couldn't sign Sancho in the summer of 2019 and ultimately signed Dan James instead. It's like going to a car dealership for a Ferrari and leaving with the Honda Civic.
Would you show me something if I couldn't have it?
Nonetheless, Sancho would remain at Dortmund for the 1920 season, and all things considered, this was probably a great idea because this would go on to be his best season, arguably in his career to date. At this point, now being paired with Erling Haaland, Sancho would prove to be a huge threat in the Bundesliga, putting up 20 goals and 20 assists in 44 games that year, quite literally dominating almost all attacking metrics. To this point, I feel like his pace had gone up a level, his ability to get his defenders was unstoppable, and he had developed a knack for scoring goals. This season, he would even be the first player to reach 15 goals in the Bundesliga, which goes to show just how much he was scoring. Additionally, Sancho would also end up being the runner-up for both a Golden Boy and the Copa Trophy, pinning him in the upper echelon when it came to upcoming talents in world football. The fact that United could have had this demon at this point instead of later down the timeline absolutely kills me, but whatever. We move nonetheless. But after these two incredible seasons, it was only going to be a matter of time before Sancho left, and realistically after the 1920 season, it was well known that he wanted to leave the club. But with Dortmund unable to reach agreements for other clubs that window, most notably Manchester United, it meant that Sancho was going to be stuck at Dortmund for at least another year. Dortmund valued Sancho at 108 million euros, and to that point they had already rejected 71 and 91 million euro bids. So while the 2020-2021 season would prove to be a successful one for Jadon Sancho, despite the fact that he missed some games due to injury, he would still manage to register 16 goals and 20 assists in 38 games for the club, and even though we all knew he didn't want to be there, Sancho was still delivering for the club and displaying the same dominant performances we had become accustomed to. In fact, in this season, Sancho would be very important in helping Dortmund secure the one major trophy that he won while at the club, as he would register at least one goal contribution in every match, leading to the DFB Pokal victory that season. With another masterclass season under his belt and the clock ticking closer and closer to the end of his contract, it felt like it was just a matter of time before Sancho was out the door. And well, after 3 years of constantly flirting with the guy, Manchester United finally got. On July 1st, 2021, United signed Jadon Sancho for a reported 73 million euros. There were massive expectations set on the 21-year-old upon his return to England. United had been chasing him for the last handful of years. The club had been suffering for nearly a decade to that point. They were coming off a second place finish and adding one of the best young prospects to the attack. Sancho had to perform. He was joining a team that on paper was destined to at least start performing better. And it would be up to Ole Gunnar Solskjaer to get the most out of an attack that consisted of Jadon Sancho, Cristiano Ronaldo, and Marcus Rashford. What could go wrong? Well, this season would be the one where everything took a turn for the worse at United. Despite the fact they were coming off that second place finish, the club quickly became a cesspool of negativity, and due to a combination of poor tactics and a poor overall squad, the team underperformed greatly. Having gone from a great environment that was somewhat built around him at Dortmund, Sancho was integrated into a team in a much more intense league that unfortunately never really suited him. He would go on to register just 5 goals and 3 assists in 38 games, which is a massive drop off. Additionally, you would begin to just be able to see the decline in his performances because as a whole, he wasn't really able to dominate Premier League defenses like he was in the Bundesliga. And with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer getting sacked this season and Ragnick coming in to finish off the year, Sancho was never really able to build any consistency. And if you thought this season was bad, where Sancho had a regression in not only his numbers but visibly just his style of play, the next season would just be even worse. So Erik ten Hag came into the club and there were hopes that he would be able to turn things around. Spoiler alert, he did not. Ten Hag, for many reasons which I've covered on the channel, somewhat struggled this season and the team was very inconsistent. Despite winning an EFL Cup and finishing in 3rd place, many of the attacking players in Ten Hag's system struggled greatly and Sancho especially was affected. Even though he got a handful of key goals this year, Sancho was never really able to get going and his relationship with Ten Hag just got progressively worse. A lot of the issues he had dealt with at United this year pretty much came to a head, and pretty much halfway through the season, Sancho just began to miss a lot of games. Come to find out that Sancho had been sent to the Dutch mountains by Ten Hag in order for him to collect himself and come back to the squad whenever he was ready. Citing depression as the main reason for his absence, many believe that Ten Hag's willingness to give Sancho a break was a positive sign in their relationship, but boy would things really just not get any better from here. Sancho would come back into the squad for the second half of the season and never really performed any better. So you had to question, what the heck was the point of getting 2 months off if he was just going to come back and still be playing like shit? And there were also already murmurs of Sancho's poor attitude at the club, as he would be deemed a lazy player when compared to others. So with another poor season at the club under his belt, the 22-23 season is where everything just hit the fan. This year, Sancho would only feature in 3 games for the squad. Ten Hag would drop him for a game against Arsenal as he believed that his performances in training were simply just not up to par and was simply asking for more from Sancho. In response, Sancho would go on to make a statement on Twitter that essentially called Ten Hag a liar, and from here there was no going back. Ten Hag would not put Sancho back into the squad until he issued an apology, but that apology never came and it was never going to. In fact, Sancho was even banished to train with the under-21s, and at this point it more so became a question on when and how he would leave the club, as surely you did not want a record signing sitting at home collecting all these wages while playing Fortnite. One thing to keep in mind more or less is that this is the 3rd club in Jadon Sancho's career where he's cited to have disciplinary issues. I didn't necessarily mention it earlier because everything was peachy at Dortmund, at least on paper, but one report that was kind of swept under the rug during this whole time was the fact that Sancho at Dortmund was cited to have issues with tardiness at the club and wouldn't react well to any consequences. And as I mentioned earlier, he more or less had his issues at City as well, which led to the club being okay with him leaving. But despite all of this and missing pretty much half of the season at the club, Sancho would leave on loan in the January window and would return to Dortmund until the end of the season. So Sancho was back at Dortmund, a super positive environment for him to thrive, right? And upon his return, many felt that he was finally going back to that more stable environment. So he felt like he was gonna have more respect. And a lot of this came down to how United and Ten Hag were being perceived at them. The media and fans oftentimes came to the defense of Jadon Sancho, even though he didn't really deserve it in the grand scheme of things. With that being said, the return to the club would be a decent one as he would have a couple of good performances in both the Bundesliga and the Champions League, most notably when he tore Nuno Mendes to shreds in their tie against PSG, and the Sancho propaganda was at an all-time high. This one performance had overshadowed many of the average ones that he had put up during his return to the club, although he did help them make the Champions League final, where he would completely ghost against Real Madrid. But when all was said and done, the thing that I find the most interesting about Jadon's return to Dortmund and how everyone was praising him and saying Sancho is back and Sancho's so happy now, and wow, who wouldn't want to have Sancho on their team, was that when it came time for clubs to put their money where their mouths were, no one wanted to sign Jadon Sancho. Everything just fell quiet. So what happened? Why did no one want to take Sancho after everyone was just giving him all that love? So with Dortmund not choosing to re-sign him, nothing really solidifying elsewhere, he would return to United. But it was clear that Sancho did not want to be at United, and after a civil conversation with Ten Hag, both agreed that it would be best for both parties to move on. So on August 31st, 2024, Jadon Sancho was signed on a season-long loan to Chelsea with the obligation to buy him for 20 million euros at the end of the season. On paper, this was a very odd move for a couple of reasons. First of all, United was selling to Chelsea, which is a direct rival. Yes, Sancho hadn't been the best player in the world at United, but you were still directly making a rival better by giving them a good, solid attacker. Secondly, from Sancho's standpoint, we didn't really know if he was going to get the chance to play. Chelsea already had so many attacking options like Cole Palmer, Madueke, Mudryk, Nkunku, João Felix at that point. They would go on to sign Pedro Neto as well. So there was huge question marks on if Sancho was really even going to get the chance to be a part of this team. It was very congested already, and even then, if he did play, where was he going to play? What was going to be the best role for Jadon Sancho in this team? Well, to pretty much no one's surprise, Jadon Sancho has been very inconsistent this season. He had a good start at the club as he would get 3 assists in his first 3 games in the Prem for Chelsea, if you would call some of those assists, but from there, he has not really done anything notable. He did get a goal against Tottenham in a 3-4 win, which was huge, especially considering Tottenham is a big rival for Chelsea, but what started off as everyone giving Jadon Sancho his flowers, and he's finally joining a better team, and he's finally doing better in the Premier League, has quickly taken a turn for the worse. See, with Jadon Sancho currently on a massive run of pretty much not doing anything in the Premier League over the last handful of games, Chelsea fans are starting to turn on him. His performances aren't really there, he's not doing anything in the games, he's not providing goals, he's not providing assists despite the bad performances, so Chelsea fans are already starting to turn on him. Sancho's inability to perform in some of these games has directly led to them dropping points or not being able to kind of, score more goals and push the club forward in their short title charge that they had. And another thing that Chelsea fans are quickly starting to realize, as United fans did as well, was the fact that the guy won't take any responsibility for his actions. Despite the poor performances, despite the fact that he hasn't been up to par, he really isn't contributing anything to the team numbers wise despite his poor performances. Sancho's out here claiming that he's finally freed from the grasp of United because of that terrible time that he had at the club. My brother, you've been performing terrible for the last 10-15 games. Why don't you look in the mirror and ask yourself if that's really freedom? And yes, Sancho at the moment of course is in the headlines because of the fact that he commented freedom under Marcus Rashford's Instagram. Instagram post. Rashford's loan to Aston Villa for the rest of the season clearly has incited some emotions out of Jadon Sancho, so he feels like they're in the same boat. But apparently Rashford doesn't even want anything to do with him. But with all this being said, what is next for Jadon Sancho? After dominating at Borussia Dortmund during his first stint there, finally moved to a big club at United, where he unfortunately flopped. Did the club fail him, and was he thrown into kind of a toxic environment? Yes, absolutely. But Sancho never really did himself any favors either. Like I said, he just never was really up to par when it came to going up against Premier League defenders. His end product was never really there, and he looked scared to just take on his man every single week. He returned to Dortmund, where he then had the ability to play against these open spaces in the Bundesliga, and go figure he would have a decent loan spell. But like I said, no one wanted to buy him, which begs the question, why? If he had performed so well, and we all had been able to see he still has the ability to perform outside of the United system, why did no one want to buy him? Chelsea took a punt on him, and this season so far, we've seen how it's not really working out. Sancho's more or less performing the same way that he performed his first season at United, at Chelsea this season. But Sancho, at just the age of 24, has already had two massive clubs not work out for him. What is next for him? Does he really fit any other system at top clubs around the world? You don't see him at a Liverpool, at a Madrid, at a Barcelona, at a Bayern Munich. So where's he gonna go from here? Do we just have to accept that Jadon Sancho is gonna be washed from here and he'll end up at smaller clubs like Man City, back at Borussia Dortmund? What is next for Jadon Sancho?